So, on today's episode of Follow the Prophet, I'm interviewing someone who I would consider a friend and who I often see around when I hang out in New York. He's a political operative, is the best way to describe him, but also generally a Renaissance guy. He's here to talk about progressive politics, which, if you've been listening to the podcast, is not something we typically cover, nor am I generally interested in, quite frankly. But it's one of those things that it's like the cloud above our heads. We're going to have to take notice and learn more about it. Ryan Adams of HZQ Consulting. Good afternoon, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
So, Ryan, progressive politics. I see everywhere across the country, it's becoming more mainstream no matter what you think, and there's a whole sort of movement occurring. What do you think the time is now?
I think a lot of people are just getting fed up with the status quo. I mean, when we think about progressive politics, we think about, oddly enough, I think about a Republican because I think of Teddy Roosevelt, the original progressive from way back when. And so much of his approach to progressivism was just traveling around the country and hearing the stories of working class people and how they were being continually downtrodden by a system that just felt broken. And I think the running theme that you hear in progressive politics is that the system is broken and we have to fix it. And then the proposal of how you is very particular, but I think if I can, a quick anecdote. I was working on a race in a very purple district. Like they voted for Trump on the presidential line, and then they voted for Democrats on the other lines. Like that's how purple it was. And one of the candidate that I was working with, he took a stance on police reform, and people would write to him and say, "I can't believe you want to defund the police." He didn't actually want to defund the police, but there was a pact with dark money saying that he wanted to like release criminals into your grandma's house and lies and all that. And they would write these emails and they'd say, "I can't believe you want to defund the police. It's terrible." And then they would say, "I mean, yeah, we're spending a lot on police and we're not really getting safety results. And yeah, I think sometimes the police shouldn't do stuff that they do, like taking care of like mental health issues, because like social workers would be better. And I don't understand why we're not spending more money on putting police in neighborhoods. Like when I was growing up, like if they were kind of community policemen who like really were involved in the community. But I don't want to defund the police." And then if you look at all the things that defund the police people were arguing for, it was literally all of that. It was, I think the left and the right have a lot of agreement on kind of where the issues are right now. But the problem is we are all very caught up in how to make those things happen. And I think we're all being pulled by the apparatuses of the political system that we have currently. Because it seems like in this very purple district, Republicans and Democrats wanted to stop spending so much money on wasteful stuff, but how they were talking about it was the real big difference.
And, a lot of the crossover appeal, right, is this, realization that the economic system at least needs reform. We don't agree on how to get there, but let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think the problem is today in today's world? And why do you think both candidates on the left and the right are gaining popularity because of their anti-establishment, appeal?
Because I think everybody can kind of feel right now that we're all working harder. I mean, productivity has gone up continuously since the 70s, but the wages haven't matched that. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're you're working 40 to 60, some people working 80 hours a week just to get by, and you're going, how is it possible that I'm working more than I ever did before and things haven't gotten better? And you can partially blame that on inflation, but it's much more tied to the connection between wages and productivity. We're seeing money being siphoned off from every big company left and right and being put into the pockets of very few people. I mean, I think the left and the right both agree that where all of the money from all of our work is going is not going into the right pockets. Whether you think it should be going into the pockets of the government and then redistributed to people who need it, or into the pockets of people and then hoping that people will step up and do the right thing, that's a different story. But I think we're all tired of working very, very hard and not getting the money that we need out of it, especially out of this fear in a globalized economy that, if you ask for more, I'm a political operative, and gosh, I feel so pretentious saying that, But like, I actually run a digital marketing and strategy agency. We have non-political clients, and I can't tell you how often we get emails from, agencies in other countries offering to do what I do, literally emailing me saying, sir, you can white label all of our services for a fraction of the price and then just go off on a beach somewhere. They're like, we're in a global marketplace, and it's very scary for us to ask, well, I want more money, I need more money, I can't exist without more money. And then all of a sudden some guy in India is emailing them going, I'll do your social media for free. It's not going to be great, but it's going to be cheaper than that other guy. And in a world where money is hard to come by for everyday businesses and everyday people, cheap feels like a good investment. It's not, but it feels like a good investment.
So it seems like we're engaged in a labor race to the bottom, but there's also a lot of migration occurring in the United States. Someone like me who leaves, high tax states like New York and migrates to low tax states like Florida. Why do you think people are doing that and literally marching away from these high tax places?
Well, that's a tough one, because I'm here in New York City. I love New York City. I will not be giving up on New York City anytime soon. We were just talking about, I just moved, so I doubled down on New York City. I moved deeper into Manhattan. Um, I think people are moving because they think they're going to get a better deal elsewhere. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I have family in Austin, Texas, and they saw huge surges in real estate. People were offering to buy my family's house in Austin, Texas for like 2 times what it was worth. And I was like, you should sell it. Just sell it now. Buy another house. Who cares? They're like, people are only going to be crazy for so long. But the problem is that when someone, uh, can you still hear me? Sorry, just got a
Yeah, I hear
notification
you.
there.
No
Great.
problem.
The problem is that when someone connects with a new community, they're expecting all the same resources to be there. You could move to Austin, Texas, hoping that, yeah, I'll just work from home and hopefully all the business will be there, hopefully all the connections will be there. But someone has to build all those things up. You can move to my wife is in a Facebook group called For the Love of Old Houses. And they don't pay me to say that, but they post these beautiful old houses that are like, I saw a 10-room mansion for $100,000 in Elmira, New York, and the whole pitch was like, you could take out a $300,000 home loan, have a 10-bed mansion, and it would cost you $1,600 a month in like a mortgage. And I get it, but like, why are you're moving there hoping to escape high taxes or hoping to escape, whatever you think is
Cost of
going
living,
on.
we'll call it. Yeah.
I mean, cost of living, right? We worried about the cost of living, but we're not worried about the value of living. And I think a lot of people who move elsewhere are going to find that all the things that they left are not going to be there, and it's going to be incumbent on them to build them. And God bless them. If you move to a new neighborhood, you should be sponsoring the local theater. If you move your business to out of New York, you better be like paying for every little league in that new place so that you're a part of that community. I have no patience for carpetbaggers in any way.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Ryan, and it's definitely true that institutional strength in low tax states is definitely lower, right? And you make a good point. But the problem is it's already happening. And in fact, I get a lot of my updates about New York politics from you and to me, which is one, you have a declining tax base because a lot of the city's revenue depends on very, very high income earners, which many are in the process of leaving. And two, you have a city apparatus that is sort of rotten and it has a talent deficit and is inefficient and is a slow, lumbering beast. And then you have politics that are demanding ever more, which is only normal, right? We want more from our government, but at what point does the whole system not hold up in the face of all these changes?
I mean, I think you've really hit on something that's important. I was saying that there's the tax base is leaving, but that's because the tax base, the tax code is written not around the current situation that we're in, but around where the situation was 20, 30 years ago. The problem in my mind isn't that these are high tax states; it's that they're highly inefficient states. Like there's a bill that's being proposed in the New York State Senate by Andrew Gounardes, and he's talking about taxing big data companies because Every time you log onto Facebook, Facebook makes money off of you and then pays zero taxes on all the stuff that you did. You are in effect, every time you post, every time you comment, creating value for them through your labor. And at no point is that ever monetized coming back to the community. We're charging people hoping that real estate is going to save things, and we're charging people hoping that an old economy is going to save things. But maybe we need to look back and say, every time we make a law around these kinds of things, people are just going to try and figure out a way of doing it. We need to be writing new laws, better laws. And I think a big way that we get new laws and better laws is by getting new people and better people in. And I think the left and the right can both agree we need that.
You're suggesting we're fighting the wars of our mothers and fathers, right? We kind of think of the world as if it's still the 1990s, and whether you're on the left or the right, I like this idea of inefficient government. Government needs to be updated, streamlined. We constantly bicker about shrinking the size of government or growing the size of government, and I feel like we never talk about the value we get for the money that we put in.
Absolutely. I mean, I laugh because we always talk about the New York Post loves scaring people about homelessness in New York City. Every time you open the New York Post, it's something like, the city is overrun with homeless people. If you go to Washington Square Park, they will eat you alive. That is not true.
I've read it. I've read it, Ryan.
Not everyone has.
It's like 1969 over there. It's like continuous Woodstock right now.
Oh,
allegedly.
yeah. I walked past Washington Square Park and I was just pulled into a production of Hair. It was crazy. Everyone was naked and chanting. No, they say we got to deal with the homelessness issue. Okay, it is cheaper to house people than to pay for services to keep people homeless. Why aren't we just taking the money and putting it towards housing people? My wife is a social worker with the homeless, and she says housing first is the thing that will solve everything. But Ryan, what about mental health issues? It is easier to take your pills that will help your mental health issue if you have a place to drink water and have a schedule. But Ryan, what about domestic violence? It is easier to escape a domestic violence situation if you have somewhere to stay. We need more housing. We need better housing. I mean, I'm very, I'm a progressive, but Eric Adams has some really great housing and zoning plans for Manhattan that could really help this city. And I can't wait to see what he does. I mean, he's not beholden to a lot of the power structures that are already in place. So it could be a really big change here. So when we think about homelessness, and this goes right back to people who moved to Austin, Austin has a huge homelessness problem. There are people who are sleeping underneath the overpasses because the heat is so bad, if they stay outside, they'll die. There is no...
Well, homelessness is a national crisis. And unfortunately, Ryan, and I don't say this as a partisan bickering thing, but liberals have been on the wrong side of history with zoning. And obviously, you have the tale of two cities with zoning in America, right? You have Houston that has no zoning, and they're literally building houses in reservoirs, right? And then you have the city of Berkeley, California, that basically invented single-family housing zoning and caused the national homelessness crisis. And I'm happy to hear that the new mayor of New York, the mayor-elect Eric Adams, has different ideas, because it's literally supply and demand, right? If you increase the supply of housing, you're going to bring down the price, and homelessness will go down, something that California and other liberal places don't understand, evidently.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because people have been talking about the New York real estate market was really hit hard by COVID, but the New York real estate market was really hit hard by China closing off investments in the New York City real estate market. And that happened in 2017. And since then, we've been seeing projects slowly fall apart, but it represents a much larger issue that we have been building housing for Chinese investment accounts and Russian oligarchs and whoever is trying to squirrel their money out of their country and put it somewhere safe, like in New York City. We've been building lockboxes, and we have not been taxing those lockboxes. We have not been charging these people who have left places fallow. That hurts the surrounding economy. And it's just gotten to a point where we have to ask, why are we building what we're building? Why do 4 different high-rise luxury towers that each have 250 apartments in them have to be across the street from each other in downtown Brooklyn when everywhere else needs more housing that is affordable?
And zoning and the cost of labor, Ryan. It's pretty straightforward.
But it comes down to the idea, and it's funny, called me a progressive, and if you go into really progressive circles, they'll start chopping up labels, and they'll say progressives didn't destroy housing. Liberals destroyed housing because liberals wanted to create a little microcosm of the American dream where everyone gets their own house. And because of that, they became the not in my backyard NIMBYs who pushed people out when they needed to build more housing. A lot of folks will say they want everyone to have an opportunity in life. They just don't want it near their opportunity. And that,
I just I think this is one of the biggest issues of our time, Ryan. And this is if you want to follow the profit, the problem with our current housing crisis, which is now national, it used to just be in our big cities, but now it's
absolutely.
everywhere. The cancer has spread, is that the net effect of all these zoning laws and restrictions is just a disaster. Surging levels of homelessness, lower levels of home ownership, and it's a complete evisceration of the American dream. And it's rule number one. And now you see people writing op-eds in places like Bloomberg and Yahoo that say, oh, a renter society is a dream for America. And I don't think it's a dream. I think it's a nightmare.
I mean, some people want to rent. I was just earlier today, I was just reading about why everything is pushing towards renting. And it's partially because the debt cycle has gotten out of control. Like Ray Dalio, one of billionaire, I think one of the smartest people out there, has this whole theory about short-term and long-term debt cycles. And the short term is why we have a crash every 10 years around some sort of bubble, whether it's tech, whether it's real estate, whether it's, I mean, cryptocurrency is not big enough quite yet to be a bubble, but certainly you're getting the sense of that. And then we have these long-term debt cycles where the whole political and social economy kind of gets flipped on its head. Because if you spend 40 years building up the value of housing and you spend 40 years convincing multiple generations that housing will never go down, it will always be the best investment, and people take that totally uncritically, eventually those chickens have to come home to roost. Every debt is someone else's income, and you have to pay those things. So we can't keep printing the money that we do and not expect that at some point it's going to have to be paid back. It's going to have to be dealt with. And even with modern monetary theory, there has to be some sort of rationality and semblance of order in the system. And I think a lot of young people, people under 40, are looking at the system and the world that they grew up in, and they're going, none of this makes any sense. Investing in these things is very dangerous. So on the bright side, we are at the end of a long-term debt cycle. It's a brave new world. I have a master's in religion, and it's an apocalypse in the sense that a lot of revelations will come, and a new beginning will come out of it.
Yeah, Revelation to Genesis. I guess that's the cycle, right?
That is
So, so Ryan, you sound like a fiscal conservative. It seems like in Washington these days, we're all modern monetary theorists, whereas, the deficit doesn't matter, debt doesn't matter, let's give everyone what they want. We basically have a Republican tax regime and universal basic income at the same time. Half of our money that is flowing through the system is borrowed at the federal level. Consumers are drowning in debt. Ray Dalio's right. We are at end game in terms of debt. How long can this system go on?
So I do want to say I'm not a fiscal conservative, because the thing that I disagree with is the Republican tax regime. I think you have to tax people with money. The problem is that most people don't have the money. I'm very in favor of the modern monetary policy if it's going from the government directly to people. And we're seeing that with the child tax credit. I mean, I can't tell you how many lives I know in New York City were saved by the fiscal stimulus checks that hit. It let people, save their lives. I saw group chats of people Venmoing each other just to help them get to that point where the stimulus got there, and people were really. It was a very dark time. So I think you got to pay for that by taxing people who are flying into space currently, because those people.
No, a not so subtle reference to Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's never a good sign when the richest people on the earth are like, you know what I should do? Leave immediately. It's very scary when the world is on fire and they're like, I'm just going to go to another planet. So how long do I think it has? I mean, I'm not Nostradamus. I'm not gonna predict any, particular timelines. But we have. I'm gonna go back to Ray Dalio. Everyone should go
I
follow him
read the
on
book.
LinkedIn.
It's
Oh,
great.
it's
Principles of
fantastic.
Debt. It was fantastic.
Principles is one of the best books I've ever read. I read it once or twice a year just because it's like a fantastic management book. But he's on LinkedIn once every week, just typing away all of his thoughts. And he's got a bunch of great YouTube videos that explain all this. And one of the things that he really likes to stress is that at the end of a long-term debt cycle, the polarization between the haves and the have-nots get very, very, very intense. And other countries will see the weakness in a polarized government and exploit it. He loves talking about how empires rise and fall, and whether they fall apart gracefully and kind of give way to a new world order, or they are ripped apart by their own internal forces, is really on how they choose to deleverage, how they choose to deal with growing income inequality. And so what we're looking at, I'd say over the next 10 years is a global world order that's really changing. You have, pre-COVID, China was already building the infrastructure to become the ascending power. Their Belt and Road Initiative was a masterstroke in political, political global economics and whatnot. But then COVID, low interest loans to projects that require resources and labor in the middle of a global pandemic become a very, very tight, very, very hard investment to make. I mean, we're seeing everything that happened with Russia, and to think that Russia is not a player in all the different cybersecurity initiatives we have to be worried about. The whole world is kind of looking at America right now going, it is not as strong as it used to be. I can be a power. We can be a power. And knowing that, I think it's incumbent on us to not rest on our laurels, because the next 10 years we could see skirmishes in the South China Sea. We could see infrastructure attacks by global actors. We don't know what the world could look like, and to assume that the last 30 years is a good predictor of the next 10 is a good way to be caught off guard. The same way assuming the last 3 years was a good predictor of what 2020 would have been.
But Ryan, a lot of that has to do with, we have, from the outside looking in, the division is so bad in this country that it's highly unusual for someone like me to have someone like you on the same podcast without screaming at each other. So how do we, keep it together here to prevent us from, just crumbling and giving an opportunity to bad agents like China?
I mean, I think it's a really good question, because I'm a little worried that someone's going to like tar and feather me for just saying it. But so be it. Anyone who wants to kind of rip me apart for coming on a podcast to talk about how we need to work together is probably not someone who's going to work together with me in the first place. And I say that for the left and the right. I think when I talk in progressive circles about political organizing, there's a lot of folks who come at this and they think, I don't ever want to work with a Republican because they are never going to act in good faith with me. And I feel like I wish I could say the same for Republicans coming towards Democrats, but I feel like a lot of Democrats in Congress will always fall for the trick that Republicans will be like, if you just give me an inch, I promise I won't take a mile. I mean, I'm not going to name congressional names, but there's got to be a couple of them with really sore backs from trying to kick that football and falling. I think the problem here is that it doesn't feel like we can trust the other side to actually make good on their promises. And, I was not a fan of Donald Trump, one could say, very strongly. And I think he eroded that in so many ways. I mean, his counterpunching, his approach to government was anyone who gives up an inch is a sucker and they deserve to be exploited. And the moment that becomes the political tenor, the moment that becomes the tenor of the Republican Party, you're going to get Democrats saying, why bother? Why, what we saw with all of the reconciliation in Congress of like, we're not going to, Mitch McConnell, we're not going to sign anything until we get exactly what we want. You had organizers everywhere across the country going, please, for the love of God, do not fall for this. He is going to ask for concessions. You are going to give concessions. And then he is not going to whip the votes. And you are going to be left in a weaker bargaining position. And, well, we got to try. And then you try, and guess what? It doesn't happen. And now we're going to head towards reconciliation with the stuff that we need.
But
We need,
I hear the exact same thing about people on the right with how they feel about people on the left. Listen, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm a registered independent. Like, I don't care to correct you. I tend to think that interviews are meant to channel the energy of the guests, not fight with them. But, it's one of those things that, like, hear the exact same argument from the right. So to me, and this is just speaking as someone who just wants to see a better country and a more unified people and really to set our differences aside, it's really easy to blame each other. But in the end, it's us who suffers. We all suffer.
so I think you've hit on a very good point. And I'm gonna validate that and then tell you a little secret. I think you're right that we need the only way that we come to this together is that we stop playing in the media wars and we start turning down the rhetoric. The moment you say, I will never, like when Mitch McConnell said, like, I am the Grim Reaper of bills in the Senate, like, I've come to kill them. There's no working with a person like that. Whether you say it privately or publicly, like, that stuff gets out. And that really brings me to the thing that I've seen. I've been working in politics for a chunk of time now, and the thing that I think most people don't realize, and I tell this to everyone I talk to, politicians are afraid of the people that they serve. Not in the like, oh God, they're going to come for me kind of way, but like, you have so much more power than you imagine as a constituent. If you, like, I'm the guy who checks the email account when you email info@politician.org or whatever. Uh, and every one of those emails gets forwarded to a campaign manager, a candidate. I have seen what happens when a coordinated campaign calls an office in Congress or a state legislature's office. The moment you get five calls, someone goes, "We have to have a meeting about this. How did this happen?" So anytime you think, God, I hate the way this politician who represents me is asking, you need to call them. You need to email them. You need to
Well,
post about them in an
I know
email.
this, Ryan. I
Oh yeah.
worked in constituent affairs for a Republican politician at the state level in Florida. And oh my gosh, if you got 2 or 3 emails on the same topic, it was like, wait,
Oh
stop the
yeah.
presses. And people don't understand that there's so many different levels of government, even your state rep or your state senator, wherever you live in America, like you have a voice. And it's not just about national politics.
And it's not related to how much you donate and this and that. It's so funny because people think that money in politics is what wins, and what money in politics is what matters. But if you were paying attention to the New York City mayoral race, there were people who spent millions of dollars and came in abysmal in the rankings and whatnot. And they think that I've literally seen like state elected officials say, listen, lobbyists can give me whatever money they want, and I will happily take a meeting with them. And then I can happily ignore everything they just told me because you cannot buy me. But I have never seen a state rep that I've worked with, or a congressional rep, or anyone for that matter, say, "Oh yeah, just ignore that person. They called and they were upset." No, the moment they call, they get an email back. They get a if the only time I've never seen someone respond is when there was some sort of email issue. Like they didn't get the email, they didn't get the call, they didn't get the text. But I think, going back to that, the last, the sins of the past becoming the problems of today. I think there was a very strong sense. Was it Fukuyama who said the end of history? Like the neoliberal order has kind of settled history. We don't need to fight for things anymore. Everything is pretty good. Everything is pretty stable, and any aberrations from that are just little changes to the sacred timeline. They're not. They can be pruned and be dealt with. So
So tell me about running a campaign. What really happens behind the scenes? So because we're all so political now, and no matter where you're from, the left or the right, like there's all this sausage that's being made, behind the curtain. And what really happens? You mentioned that we all have a voice and you actually listen to people, and that money doesn't matter as much as you think. What else is an important note that we should take note of?
I mean, do you want to hear how a good campaign is run? Because I've got some stories
Sure.
about how bad campaigns are run too.
Sure, both. I want to
No,
hear them both.
I mean, good campaigns are run by people who know and love their community. So, like I said, I have a master's in religion. I almost became a rabbi. And I was speaking to a rabbi about this, and the rabbi said to me, to be a rabbi is to have a profound love of Jews and only a moderate love of Judaism. Politics is the same way. You have to love every call you get. You have to love every interaction you have. If you are running as a politician to be a real policy wonk who spends their days writing laws and whatnot, you will be a great legislative director and a terrible politician who will not win. Because, I mean, 85% of every good political campaign is talking to voters. And that's, if I was running for something, it would be me talking to voters, and then it would be me recruiting 25 people, 5 in every part of the district, talking to voters, and then recruiting people who in languages that I do not speak to talk to voters and record robocalls and send out texting. The idea here, and I have studies on this, and it's definitely, if you look through the elections that people have been winning lately, if you do not talk to voters, you will not win. You absolutely need to talk to voters. And when you talk to them, you need to talk to them honestly and earnestly. Do not pay random people to knock on doors and go, "Hi, my name is Todd. I'm from Ryan Adams' campaign. Have you made your decision to vote?" "No, I haven't, Todd. Please go home. I've never heard of this guy. I have 1,400 pieces of mail from him." I have a folder right here, literally, of all the mail from races that I never read because I got so many of them in New York City. People want to raise money so they can do big, sexy TV ads, but big, sexy TV ads do not win races. Big, sexy mail pieces do not win races. You win races when you care. That is the long and short of it.
That goes against everything we hear, and big money donors who are they're ripping up the airways, they're spending money on television commercials, they're putting out mailers. It seems like it's very much a money game, but that's not what you're suggesting.
Well, it is a money game if you do not see the thing about lies is that lies only fill a void when there's a void to be filled. If you have not spoken to voters and someone says, "I heard that so and so kicks puppies," if they know nothing about you, the first thing that they heard was, "I hear so and so kicks puppies," and they'll go, "That sounds kind of crazy, but he never knocked on my door." That race that I was talking about where a billionaire had spent $1 million on TV ads to say that this guy hated the police. The ads, we did a whole study of this, and we found that the ads didn't work. People remembered them. People remembered his ads more than they remembered our ads about the candidate, but they didn't vote on them because everyone was going, "Oh, that guy doesn't hate the police. He was endorsed by the Police Benevolent Association of New York State. He doesn't hate the police. He passed the 9/11 responders bill." You can scream whatever you want about your opponent, but if it doesn't feel true because you've already had honest interactions with them, it doesn't work. People, to go back to what I was saying about people thought history had ended, we don't have to fight anymore. Politics became very lazy. Politics in the 90s and the early 2000s became this crazy, I've met those consultants who were big then, and so many of them are you put out the mail, you do the TV ad, you do the robocall, you could do these Facebook ads, but I don't care. That's not where the voters are. You got, they don't kiss babies because babies don't vote, but they will hella send you to a senior center because they think the only people that vote are seniors, and that's why they'll spend 25% of your budget on mail. And that's just not true. People who vote are people you engage. And if you think, there's this funny thing where a lot of old school consultants will say, well, that group of people don't vote. The Asian American.
Hint to us, right? They ignore us. They're like, "Oh, you're under 40. You're never gonna vote."
Oh yeah, or they'll do it with ethnic groups. They'll be like, "Asian Americans don't vote," and someone said that to me, and I went, "Well, one, Asian American in New York City could be Korean, it could be Malaysian, it could be Chinese, it could be Japanese. That's there's a Spanish speaking people don't vote. okay, cool. Who are you talking about?
That's a
That's
big umbrella term.
right.
Yeah.
That's some lazy nonsense. And they do that because they don't want to be engaged. And like the thing that I would tell anyone doing anything right now, whether you're starting a business, whether you're running a political campaign, whether you're starting a nonprofit, because we need those too, you have to care more than you've ever cared before. And when you do, it will shine through because everyone else, all the big established people that you're fighting, they have gotten lazy. They have gotten lazy. And the only reason they suddenly care is because you have scared them now. And that, I worked on Jamaal Bowman's congressional race. And I remember the beginning of that race, people were like, no one is going to beat Elliot Engel. The man is an institution. And then the more we did, the more the more they cared. And it wasn't, what did Elliot Engel say on that hot mic? I wouldn't be here if there wasn't an election. Woof.
Whoa, I remember that.
He
Yeah.
said it, and I just went, that's it. That is the confirmation of everything people believe is wrong with politics in one statement. And he deserves to lose. And he did. So if you're running on the left or the right, I beg you to run with policies that center people. And I'm gonna do one more religious thing. There's a prayer in Judaism. You're supposed to say it every day, and it says that you should love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And that is how you need to approach everything, with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. Then you can follow whatever prophets PROPHET or PROFIT that you want, and I guarantee you'll go very far.
So tell me a little bit, since you are a quasi rabbi and in politics, I'm sure Israel's on your radar. And Israel's something that we've all seen come into the news a lot. It seems like American Jews are peeling off in their support for Israel, and you elected someone who has famously spoken in favor of the Palestinian cause, Jamaal Bowman.
Yeah.
Uh, do you regret having removed someone who was very pro-Israel and replaced them with someone who is not so committed, we'll call it?
Well, I don't think Jamal Bowman is anti-Israel. I think he's pro-peace, and I think pro-peace requires pro-dialogue. And I'm no expert on Israel. Love it. Honeymooned there, really fantastic. Um, but
Wait, the rabbi honeymooned in Israel? How
oh,
unusual.
actually, it's funny because it's all tied to what you just said. I was on a program called Honeymoon Israel that's meant to engage non-traditional Jewish couples. My wife is Catholic, I'm Jewish, with Jewish life, Jewish community, and Israel. And the reason the program exists is because for so long the assumption was like, if you are a Jew, you will go to college, you will be in Hillel, you will then go on Birthright, and then you will love Israel forever, and you will stop asking any questions about it. And that worked for a good chunk of time. But as things developed, people began to question more things, and great programs like Honeymoon Israel are trying to engage people in a way that makes them go, like, wow, I spoke to Israelis. We went to the Lebanon border. We saw the walls and the holes from rockets. We spoke with Palestinians. If I'm no Israel expert, but I will say the best way to learn about the Israel-Palestine conflict is to talk to Israelis and Palestinians and hear from them about what their experiences are and what's going on. I mean, even Israel is going through its own political revolution. Getting rid of Bibi is like a big deal. It is. I'm trying to think of the right word that doesn't have a negative connotation, but like it's life changing.
Is there room for Israel support among progressives? Because it seems like a lot of people are concerned that progressives are just anti-Israel or.
I think there's room for it if progressives want to make room. I've been in some spaces where I've had to call out progressives for saying things like I've experienced anti-Semitism a lot in my life. I've been beaten up. I've been made fun of. I used to wear a yarmulke at one point in my life, and someone took it and played frisbee with it. Like I have experienced the anti-Semitism pretty intensely, and I've been in rooms with progressives who go, "Oh, well, that person, he's got the support of like these big Jewish donors, because of his Israel stuff," and then it slowly transitions into, "Well, you know how those people stay together." And then it suddenly is like, well, the Jews will. And the moment you say the Jews, you're in a really bad place, because just like saying the Asian Americans or the Spanish speaking vote, there are lots of different kinds of Jews. There are lots of different kinds of people, and they all have very different opinions on things. So I think if the left wants to make room for, I mean, Zionist is a very hard word because it has a lot of connotation with it, but like pro-Israel people, they can do it. There's definitely room for it. I mean, you can't have peace without partners.
You're so careful in the way you express yourself through this median. I know you. Have you been hanging out with liberals too long there, Ryan?
No, I've been hanging out with progressives. We don't like liberals anymore.
So, how do we improve our economic system while staying competitive in a superpower? Because I feel like a lot of progressive demands are, well intentioned, and in a perfect world, we give everyone everything. But we live in a world of finite resources, and you said it best. Debt is a major problem. Limitations are a major problem. So how do we do this right?
You're gonna hate this, and you can play Russian music behind it, but we need to share in the wealth a bit more. Someone said that we have a labor shortage, and it's not a labor shortage, it's a wage shortage. People know that they're in demand. That's what happens after every pandemic. We have to pay people more. We have to change the way that we treat people. And when it comes to government programs, we have to center people first. One of the things that I'm really worried about in the next year is what's going to happen when all these relief programs end, because I think we're experiencing a very different economy that's been dressed up to look very lively. But once the eviction moratoriums end, once the student loan moratorium, oh my God, Joe Biden, if you're listening, you better start fulfilling some of those promises you made, because a lot of people get mad about that.
Oh, the demands are growing on the
The
left. I
demands are
hear them
growing.
all the time. I read them. Yeah.
Right. But if you think about it this way, like my wife is a social worker. Together we have, I think it's like $1,000 or something in student loans per month that we have to do. Wouldn't you rather I spend $1,000 on American businesses? Wouldn't you rather me give that money to restaurants and tipping real people who will then go and spend it on real things? Jeff Bezos doesn't need more money. I assure you, he is good. He lost half of it, and he's still going off to space. I don't think the job creators, maybe the job creators of the past were really truly job creators, but now they're becoming robber barons like they did in the 1890s and the early 1900s, and we need progressivism more than ever because of that. And so we need to be centering people. And I guarantee you, when you put I'm trying to remember the statistic now, but the percentage of the stimulus checks that went out were almost automatically recirculated back into the economy and then taxed. That is the kind of stuff we need. I mean, we bailed out the banks.
I guess where I peel off, Ryan, is all of this is well intended, but if you forgive student loans, you have to reform higher education. And if you help people, you have to
Sure.
address the root causes of what's causing these issues. So to me, student debt and poverty and lack of healthcare coverage is more a symptom of the problem rather than the problem. And I feel like neither side really gets at that. What is the dysfunction in our economic and political and cultural world that is causing this dysfunction?
So I think you just nailed it, and I think you've actually really nailed that differentiation between the left and the right. It's that in order for us to fix things, we can't just deal with the symptoms, which is, the left loves dealing with symptoms because symptoms are painful, and the left loves dealing immediately with pain. Oh, you're homeless? Here, let me get you out of homelessness. But it doesn't fix the homelessness crisis. The right loves dealing with problems, but that takes time, and sometimes that causes more harm over time because of it. I think we need to deal with my wife, again, who is a social worker, often talks about how if you're going to help someone get out of homelessness, you have to deal with the symptoms and the problem. You can't just give someone lithium if they're bipolar and then be like, great, you should be out of your homelessness situation in the next week. That's not how it works. You need to fix the symptom and the problem. And I think one of the things that is really taxing on America right now is that it feels like no one wants to tackle both. We're chained to idols of the past. And I think what's so important about podcasts like this and the work that lots of people out there are doing is that they're trying to get new ideas and new people in who are not beholden to how these things work. And I think that's the way we're really going to change stuff. We need to listen, forgive student loans and then change the student loan program so that, you know, there aren't dinky little colleges that have 500 people at them that are not preparing anyone adequately and are just, you know, for lack of a better word, scams. Let's fix it. If we're going to fix the housing crisis, let's fix the housing crisis. I think that America would be better off if we were all fully invested. And I think that's the thing that we all really need to come by. One of the things that has really bugged me is that the media, you know, during the pandemic, there was an incredible opportunity for the media to come together and present a unified vision of what it means to be American.
That didn't happen, Ryan.
That did not happen. And it kills
No.
me. It kills me because every day I'd wake up, I'd make coffee, I'd open the news, and I'd hear these stories of misery and pain. And then I'd go to work and I would hear stories about these incredible people. There was an organizer who was also a candidate running last year, and she organized the halal carts in Queens to feed people because they couldn't work. She raised money privately, and then she paid them to make meals for Ramadan because people were hungry and the city was coming up short because of all sorts of issues. And no one ever told her story. No one ever told the story of the state senator who basically pulled a Shirley Chisholm and got a whole bunch of farmers markets to deliver their food, not to the farmers markets because they were all closed, but to food pantries instead, and paid them for it. There was so much innovation. There were so many beautiful things happening that showed that we will get through this if we work through it together. So if we're going to talk about, you know, America moving forward, it has to be one where we're all invested in this project together. And I know the left is. I know there are a lot of people on the right who are. They're not, you know, not everyone is out here just trying to get their own. I think if we're going to move forward, we have to say what's working, what's not, and how can we pull everyone along the way to make sure that there's an inclusive vision of the world that everyone has a place in. And if you want to win, you got to call people, you got to talk to people, and you have to have a vision of the world where people can see themselves in it.
And you have to have new ideas, and a lot of our wars are generational wars that are no longer relevant in today's world. And I think, you know, I don't have a lot in common with your politics, Ryan, but I think you are committed and you care. And I think that is 3/4 of the battle, really, is people who understand the issues as they are today, not as they were 25 years ago, which we seem to be rehashing all these things as if it's still the 90s, and it's
Right.
not.
If it was still the 90s and the solution still works, I could still go to a movie for like $6. And the movie theater down the street from me, I think it's 15 now. So
Yeah, and then nobody's going there because it's going straight into our houses. And the whole model of how we used to live is falling apart. And
right.
politics, whether it's left or right, should probably reflect these new realities, shouldn't they, Ryan?
It should reflect the people. The city council in New York City, for the first time, like in years, is going to reflect the real diversity of the city, you know, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of sexual orientation. And that, I mean, thank God for it. It gives me hope to see New York City, which, as much as people love to think of it as a very liberal city, but it is entrenched in economic interests that work very hard to keep things a particular way. And if New York City can overcome a lot of those interests, I know the rest of the country can too. It just takes very dedicated, very passionate people waking up every day and saying, this is worth it.
Well, as goes the rest of the country. So even if you are a Republican listening somewhere from Kansas, that's our flagship city. So we wish all of you in New York the best in all of your endeavors. And as they say often around here in Florida, where I'm doing this recording, maybe don't bring all those politics here, but bring that ferocity in attacking those special interests and all of those things that don't make any sense in today's world.
It sounds like a plan. Please also come to New York. We're reopening. We thrive on tourism. It's restaurant week. Get tested. Make sure you're negative. Get vaccinated, and come on down. Broadway's reopening in the fall. It's going to be beautiful. Please come.
I'm excited to come, Ryan. On that note, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime.